The rain poured down over the small town as gray clouds hung low in the sky, and the streets looked empty except for a few people hurrying home under umbrellas, trying not to get wet. And on the far side of the street a little girl named Emily, only 8 years old, walked slowly with her small blue lunchbox held tightly in her hands, her shoes splashing in puddles as she moved step by step through the drizzle. And though the cold wind made her shiver, she did not complain. She just wanted to get home where her mother would be waiting with a warm towel and hot tea. But on that day, something unusual caught her attention, for on the corner of the street, near the bus stop where water dripped steadily from the roof, sat a man who looked lost, tired, and broken, his thin coat soaked from the rain, his shoes torn and muddy, and his eyes staring at the ground as if the world had forgotten him. And Emily stopped walking, her young heart feeling something she could not explain, because everyone else walked past the man without even looking, some even crossed the street to avoid him, but Emily, with her innocent eyes, could not just turn away, so she stood there for a moment, biting her lip nervously as she watched him shiver, and then she stepped closer, clutching her lunchbox tighter, her mind racing as she thought about what to do. And when the man finally looked up, she saw his eyes, tired but kind, eyes that once belonged to someone who had dreams, eyes that once carried laughter and light but now only showed sadness, and she felt her heart squeeze, because though she was just a child she knew those eyes were important, they carried a story, a secret, something that mattered. And as the man whispered something under his breath, Emily carefully opened her lunchbox, and inside was one last sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, a simple meal her mother had packed for her that morning, but to Emily, it was more than food, it was comfort, and she had been saving it to eat later when she got home, but in that moment she felt she could not eat it herself, not while this man sat hungry and cold, so with trembling hands she held it out toward him, and at first he shook his head, whispering that he could not take it, but Emily pushed it closer with a small smile and said softly, "It's okay, I want you to have it," and the man's eyes widened, filling with something like tears, and with shaking hands he took the sandwich, holding it carefully as though it was treasure, and he whispered in a low, hoarse voice, "Thank you, little one, you don't know what you've done," and Emily tilted her head curiously, not sure what he meant, but then he looked away quickly and began to eat, and Emily watched for only a few seconds before turning to go home, her shoes splashing once more through puddles, her heart strangely heavy but also warm, and she thought about the man all the way home, wondering who he was, why he was out in the rain, and what he meant when he said those words. And that night as she went to bed, she could still hear his voice in her head, like an echo she could not shake, and when morning came she woke to the sound of something strange, a loud pounding at the front door of her house, a sound that shook the walls and made her heart leap in fear, and she heard her mother's voice calling nervously from downstairs, and she rushed out of bed, still in her pajamas, running to the top of the staircase, and from there she saw her mother, standing frozen at the door, her face pale, her hands trembling as heavy knocks echoed again, and when the door opened Emily gasped, because standing outside were 2 police officers, their uniforms dark and wet from the morning rain, their faces serious, and one of them spoke in a firm voice that carried through the hallway. "We need to talk to you and your daughter right now," and Emily clutched the railing, her little hands shaking as she stared down at the officers, confusion swirling in her mind, and she remembered the man from yesterday, the sandwich, the soft words he had whispered, and a deep chill ran through her as she realized something had begun, something much bigger than she could ever imagine, and though she was only a child, she felt the world around her shift, the air grow heavy, and the shadows in the house seemed longer, darker, and for the first time Emily wondered if a simple act of kindness could change everything, if maybe that man was not who he seemed, if maybe her small gift had unlocked a secret no one was supposed to touch. And as the police stepped inside, dripping water onto the floor, the suspense thickened in the air, leaving Emily frozen on the stairs, her young heart pounding with fear and questions she did not yet know how to ask. The knocking grew louder and Emily's parents rushed to the front door confused and frightened, and when they opened it 2 police officers stood in the rain, their uniforms wet, their faces serious, and they asked if Emily was home, and her mother held her close asking what this was about, and the officer replied that they needed to ask Emily a few questions about something that happened yesterday, and Emily's father demanded to know why police would want to talk to a child, and the second officer explained that a homeless man was found injured near the old train station, the same man Emily had given her sandwich to, and they said Emily was the last person seen with him, and now they needed to know what she knew, and Emily's heart raced as she remembered his kind eyes and the way he whispered those strange words after taking the sandwich, and she told them softly that she gave him food because he was hungry, and one officer looked at the other with unease like her answer only deepened the mystery, and they asked if the man said anything strange or if anyone was watching nearby, and Emily thought hard and said no, but then she remembered something else, how she had seen a black car parked across the street, its windows dark, and she thought maybe someone had been inside watching, and when she said this the officers leaned forward suddenly serious, asking her to describe the car, and Emily told them it was big and shiny and had no license plate, and her father interrupted saying she was just a child, maybe she imagined it, but the officers wrote down every word carefully as if it mattered greatly, and then one of them asked if the man touched her or gave her something, and Emily shook her head quickly, but then frowned because she remembered how his hand had brushed hers and how something small and cold was pressed into her palm, but she never looked at it because she was too busy hurrying home in the rain, and now her cheeks grew pale because she realized she had put it in her pocket and forgotten all about it, and with trembling hands she reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a small metal coin, strange and heavy with strange markings carved on its surface, and when the police saw it their eyes widened, and one of them whispered to the other, "This should not be here," and Emily's parents demanded to know what it was, but the officers would not explain, they only asked where she found it, and Emily told the truth that the homeless man had given it to her, and then said those words, "Thank you, little one, you don't know what you've done," and now the room fell silent as the rain beat against the windows, and one officer finally said, "Emily, you and your family must come with us to the station now, it is very important," and her father grew angry saying his daughter did nothing wrong and would not go anywhere, but the officer's voice grew firm, "This is bigger than you think, sir, and if we stay here you could all be in danger," and before anyone could answer the sound of an engine roared outside and bright headlights lit up the living room through the curtains, and everyone turned to the window to see a black car parked silently across the street, its engine humming, and its windows just as dark as Emily remembered, and one of the officers swore under his breath and reached for his radio calling backup, while the other drew his weapon telling the family to get down, and Emily clung to her mother's arm shaking because she now understood that the simple act of sharing a sandwich had pulled her into something far bigger and far more dangerous than she ever imagined, and outside the black car's door opened slowly, and a figure in a dark coat stepped out, standing still in the rain like he was waiting for someone to come to him, and suspense filled the house like a heavy storm cloud as everyone realized the nightmare was only just beginning. The moment the figure stepped out of the black car, the officers pulled Emily and her parents toward the back door, whispering fast orders to stay quiet and keep low, and the sound of rain on the roof mixed with the heavy thump of footsteps approaching the house from the front, and Emily's father protested again, saying they had no right to drag his family out like criminals, but the officer snapped that if they didn't move now they might not live to argue later, and with that they rushed through the kitchen and out into the night air, the cold rain soaking their clothes as they were shoved toward an unmarked police SUV parked in the alley behind the house, and one officer slid Emily and her mother inside while the other stayed at the back scanning the shadows, his gun drawn as though danger could leap out at any second, and Emily pressed her face to the window, her small hands shaking as she saw the man in the dark coat stop at their front door and lift his head slowly, almost as if he could sense her eyes watching him, and though the rain blurred her vision she thought his face looked strange, too smooth, too calm, like a mask, and then suddenly the officer jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the gear into drive, and the SUV roared down the alley, the tires splashing through puddles as Emily's mother tried to calm her, but her voice shook and broke every other word, and Emily's father demanded to know the truth, what was going on, what the coin was, why men in black cars were appearing at their home, and the officer kept his eyes on the mirror, his jaw tight, finally muttering that the coin Emily carried was not just metal, but something old and dangerous, something people had killed for before, and now that it had appeared again, everyone who touched it was marked, and Emily's father scoffed, saying it was nonsense, but his voice betrayed fear, and Emily felt the coin burning in her pocket, heavy like a stone, and she whispered that the homeless man gave it to her because he said she didn't know what she had done, and the officer's face darkened at that reply as though it confirmed a fear he already carried, and just as Emily was about to ask who the man was, headlights flared behind them bright and sharp, and the black car was there following silently through the rain, its engine low and steady like a predator stalking prey, and the officer cursed and pushed the SUV faster, weaving down side streets trying to shake it, but the black car stayed close, never falling back, never pulling closer, just haunting them like a shadow, and Emily's stomach twisted with dread as she realized they could not escape it, and then without warning the car vanished, its headlights gone, swallowed by the storm, and the officer eased the SUV a little, though his hands stayed clenched white on the wheel, and he muttered that losing sight of them was worse because it meant they were being hunted now, and the family was silent as the city lights blurred past until, finally, the SUV slid into the underground garage of the police station, and the gates closed behind them with a heavy clang, and only then did Emily's mother breathe again, though her voice cracked when she asked if they were safe, and the officer said for now, but he did not sound certain, and inside the station the family was led to a small interview room where another officer waited, a woman with sharp eyes who introduced herself as Detective Rhodes, and she crouched down in front of Emily, speaking gently but with urgency, asking if the homeless man told her his name or gave her anything besides the coin, and Emily shook her head, but then her eyes filled with tears as she whispered that the man had seemed scared, like he was running from someone, and Rhodes nodded grimly, saying that made sense because the coin Emily carried was tied to an old case, one buried so deep even the government pretended it never existed, and Emily's parents demanded answers, but Rhodes said only this, that the coin was once part of a collection of artifacts connected to disappearances, strange experiments, and a powerful group who would do anything to keep their secrets hidden, and as Rhodes spoke the lights flickered overhead, and a distant alarm echoed through the station halls, and an officer rushed in breathless, shouting that the black car had been spotted outside again, parked just beyond the perimeter, unmoving like it was waiting, and when Rhodes heard this she stood sharply, her hand on her gun as if she had been expecting it, and she told Emily's family that their lives had already changed forever, and they had only one choice now: to run before those people outside came for them, or to stay and face a truth too dangerous to imagine. And before Emily could ask what that truth was, the station doors groaned with a sound like metal being torn, and the air filled with a low humming noise that made the lights shiver and die, plunging everything into darkness. Emily's mother sat frozen on the couch while the officers stood inside the living room, rain dripping from their coats, the morning still heavy with gray clouds outside. Emily clutched her stuffed bunny tightly, her small eyes darting between the adults as if she were waiting for someone to finally explain why her small act of kindness had turned their quiet home into a place of tension. One of the officers finally spoke in a calm but serious voice. "Mrs. Parker, the man your daughter helped yesterday is not who he seems. He is not just a homeless man. His name is Daniel Cross. He used to be one of the most trusted investigators in this state, but he disappeared years ago after uncovering something dangerous." Emily's mother gasped and covered her mouth while Emily tilted her head in confusion, not fully understanding the weight of the words. The officer continued, lowering his tone as if the walls themselves could not be trusted to hear. He was chasing a case involving powerful people, people who did not want the truth exposed. That case cost him his career, his home, and nearly his life. He has been hiding ever since. Emily's little voice broke the silence. "But he was kind to me. Why are people after him if he was only helping?" The other officer exchanged a dark look with his partner before replying, "Because sometimes telling the truth is the most dangerous thing someone can do." The rain outside beat harder against the windows, filling the room with a steady rhythm like a clock counting down. Emily's mother whispered, "Why come here? Why would he speak to my daughter?" The officers glanced at each other again before answering, "Because your daughter reminded him of something he lost. He told us last night before we found him, her kindness gave him hope again. He said she gave him strength to finally stop running." Emily's heart thumped fast in her chest as her small hand tightened around her bunny. She didn't understand everything, but she knew this man had carried something heavy, and somehow her sandwich had meant more than she ever imagined. Then the first officer leaned closer and spoke with more urgency. "Mrs. Parker, we need to be clear. Daniel Cross is in danger. And now, because he spoke with Emily, your family may be in danger too. Whoever he was running from might know he's here. That is why we are here to protect you." The room grew colder as if the storm outside had slipped into their very walls. Emily's mother swallowed hard, her mind racing with fear. She turned to her daughter, kneeling so she was eye level. "Emily," she said softly but firmly, "do you remember exactly what Daniel said to you yesterday?" Emily thought for a moment, remembering the rain dripping on his face and the way his voice had trembled. Slowly she nodded. "He said, 'You don't know what you've done.'" At those words, Both officers stiffened, and the taller one scribbled quickly in a small notebook. "That's important," he muttered, almost to himself. Emily frowned, her voice small but full of curiosity. "Did I do something wrong?" Her mother pulled her into a hug, whispering, "No, sweetie, you did something good. Something very good." But even as she spoke, her voice wavered, because deep down she knew they were no longer just a normal family living in a small quiet town. The kindness of a child had opened a door to secrets bigger than any of them could have imagined. Then, as if to prove the danger was closer than they thought, a sudden crash echoed outside. The officers rushed to the window, hands moving to their weapons. Headlights flashed through the rain as a dark car pulled slowly in front of the house. The officers exchanged sharp glances before one of them whispered, "It's them. They've found us." Emily clung tighter to her mother, her heart racing. The officers drew their weapons, their faces tense and alert. Emily's mother tried to remain calm for her daughter, but fear ran through her veins like ice. What had begun with a simple sandwich in the rain was now pulling them all into the shadows of a story that was only just beginning. Suspense filled the air as heavy footsteps approached the door. Emily sat in the police station with her parents, the big clock on the wall ticking loudly in the silence, and her small hands gripped the edge of the chair as if it could protect her from the heavy tension that filled the room. Her parents whispering questions to each other, but no one giving them answers. And then finally the door opened, and the police chief stepped inside carrying a folder that looked very old and worn. His face serious but not angry. Instead it carried a kind of sadness that made Emily's mother lean forward and ask softly if they were in trouble. But the chief shook his head and looked straight at Emily before saying, "The man you helped yesterday is not just a homeless man, he is someone we have been searching for many years." And Emily's father frowned, confused, asking what that meant. And the chief opened the folder and placed an old picture on the table. The photo showing a man in a uniform smiling proudly, and Emily gasped because she recognized those same eyes, the sad but kind eyes of the man she gave her sandwich to, though in the picture he looked younger and stronger. And the chief explained in a slow voice that the man's name was Daniel Hayes, once a decorated soldier who fought in dangerous wars, but after returning home something happened, he disappeared, vanished from his family, from his friends, from the whole system, and no one knew if he was alive or dead until Emily saw him. And her mother covered her mouth in shock while her father asked how a war hero could end up homeless on the streets, but the chief did not answer. Instead he said something that made the room colder than before. He didn't just disappear, he was hidden, because he knew something powerful people wanted to keep buried. And Emily, though only a child, felt her heart race as she remembered the man's words when he whispered thank you and said she didn't know what she had done. And now she understood he wasn't only hungry, he was hiding. And by giving him food she had shown kindness that exposed his presence, and now everyone wanted to find him. Her parents exchanged worried looks, and her mother bent down to Emily's level, saying gently that she was very brave, but sometimes helping people could bring danger. And Emily asked with wide eyes, "Is he in trouble? Did I make it worse?" And the chief's face softened as he shook his head and said, "No, child, you gave him hope, but others will want to use him, or silence him, and that is why we must find him first." And he explained that Daniel Hayes had once uncovered a secret about a military project, a secret that if revealed could ruin powerful leaders, but before he could speak he disappeared. And the chief admitted that some of his own men were nervous, unsure who to trust, because not everyone in uniform was loyal to truth, and Emily's father stiffened at the thought that people in power might harm them just because their daughter gave a man a sandwich. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows like restless fingers, and the room felt darker though it was midday, and Emily could not shake the feeling that the man had given her more than gratitude, that his whisper carried a burden now resting on her small shoulders. And as she sat there she thought about how the world looked at him as a nobody, a beggar in the rain, but he was really someone who had fought for them, someone who carried secrets bigger than she could imagine. And it made her both afraid and determined, because if she had been the only one to notice him, then maybe she was meant to. The chief then lowered his voice and told them that already other groups were moving, some claiming they wanted to protect Daniel, others wanting him gone forever, and that Emily's act of kindness had pulled the first thread of a very tangled knot. And as Emily listened she did not fully understand the politics or the secrets, but she understood one thing clearly. Daniel Hayes had trusted her, even for a moment, and now she felt she could not let him down, even if she was only a little girl with A school lunchbox, because sometimes the smallest act could change everything, and the chief saw that fire in her eyes and warned her parents to keep her close. But inside, Emily knew that the story was only beginning and that the knock on their door was just the first warning of something much bigger that was coming. Emily's parents stood frozen as the detective's words echoed in the living room. The homeless man was not just anyone. His real name was Jonathan Hale, and years ago he had been a decorated police officer who disappeared after exposing corruption in the town's council. Emily, clutching her teddy bear, whispered softly, "But he was kind to me." The detective nodded, his eyes filled with worry, and handed Emily's father a sealed envelope. "He asked me to give this to your daughter if anything happened to him." The father opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting, stained by rain and age. It began with the words, "To the little girl who shared her sandwich with me. You saved me." The family leaned in as the father read aloud. Jonathan explained that he had once been a man of honor, but when he discovered powerful men in town were involved in crime and secret deals, they tried to silence him. He had been framed, hunted, and forced to vanish, living on the streets to stay alive. 4 years, no one believed him, and his name was ruined. But when Emily gave him her sandwich, he felt hope for the first time in years. "Your kindness reminded me that not everyone has turned against the truth. If the police came to your home, it means the council finally found me. Protect yourself, little one, for you are now part of something bigger." Emily's mother gasped and held her daughter close, fear running through her. The detective then added that the council leaders were panicking because Jonathan had hidden evidence, documents and recordings that could expose everything. "We believe he passed the location of those files to someone. Maybe to you," the detective said, staring at the envelope again. Emily's father looked at the back of the letter and noticed faint writing. At first, it looked like random scratches, but then Emily pointed with her small finger. "Daddy, those are numbers." It was a code, perhaps an address or coordinates. The detective quickly wrote it down and said he would send a team to investigate. Suddenly, a loud noise came from outside, the sound of a car engine revving. Emily peeked through the curtain and saw a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men in dark suits sat inside, staring at their house. "They're watching us," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The detective cursed under his breath and told the family to pack some things. "You're not safe here anymore." The tension in the room grew heavy. Emily's parents moved quickly, stuffing clothes into bags while the detective radioed for backup. But Emily's thoughts stayed with Jonathan. Why had he trusted her with his final message? She remembered his kind eyes in the rain, his voice when he said, "You don't know what you've done." Maybe he knew she was the only one who would believe him without doubt. As they prepared to leave, Emily clutched the letter tightly, whispering to herself that she wouldn't let his sacrifice be forgotten. Then the pounding of footsteps shook the porch. The men from the SUV were already approaching the house. The detective drew his weapon, and Emily's father locked the door. Her mother pulled her into the hallway, whispering calming words. Outside, a voice shouted, "Hand over the letter, and no one gets hurt." Emily's hands shook, but she pressed the letter to her chest, knowing that inside it held the secret Jonathan had died to protect. The truth was out there, hidden, waiting to be found, and now Emily and her family were caught in the middle of it. The suspense in the air was unbearable, for everyone knew that the night ahead would change their lives forever.